Welcome back to the class. We are continuing with the discussion on Emil Durkheim. And in the previous class, we had an elaborate discussion on his methodological arguments, his book, The Rules of Sociological Method, which he wrote basically to reinforce his claim that sociology really represents a new discipline. And that book really played a significant role in the institutionalization of the discipline or even the professionalization of the discipline. We discussed that book in detail, his preoccupation with the idea of the social, the way he argued that sociology studies social facts and the features of social facts and all the related topics. So in today's class as well as the next class, we will be discussing his one of the most important works of Emil Durkheim, that is the division of labor. In fact, it was his doctoral research which was published in 1893. So this is considered to be one of the most important works of Emil Durkheim because this work contains quite a lot of important concepts, important theoretical arguments about the nature of society, his understanding about the society, about the transition, about the transformation of societies, the larger question of social change, and also a host of other very important theoretical conceptions of Emil Durkheim about morality, about collective conscience, about a host of about punishment, about law, about education, and a host of other things. So this book is something very important. So so it's his first major work, which was published version of his French doctoral thesis, The Division of Labor in Society. So in this work, he actually looking to the past to interpret the present. That's what Durkheim actually does in his work. He makes a distinction between societies characterized a kind of a new society and old society. Okay, and he does not use this term. Rather, he uses a very fascinating concept called as the question of social solidarity, and we will discuss that in this particular lecture. So, on the basis of this social solidarity, he distinguishes between two types of society. One is the kind of a modern society as that was existing during Durkheim's time, a modern European industrialized society, and the other one is the more primitive, the older forms of society. So he wanted to compare or he wanted to contrast these two types of societies and then try to understand what are the fundamental differences between these two types of societies. So Durkheim examines the unique features of the modern society by comparing it to the pre-modern world of a distant era. Then he examines the shifting basis of social solidarity as societies evolve from an undifferentiated and simple profile to a complex and differentiated one. So we have seen that this whole question of social change was a major theoretical preoccupation for almost every social scientist or every historian or sociologist or even philosophers of this particular time. And most of them adhere to a conception of a unilinear evolutionary model where societies from a very simple, undifferentiated state of being transforms into a more complicated and differentiated set of existence. And they call the previous form as primitive and the present society as modern. So Durkheim also has something similar to that, a similar kind of a schema about social change, but he brings in a very important concept, a very significant concept, and this concept is what we understand as social solidarity. Okay, as social solidarity, as societies evolve from an undifferentiated and simple profile, and undifferentiated, we understand it as something simple, something similar. So homogeneity becomes the character of that particular society. Everybody is similar. There are a lot of similarity within that particular society in terms of what people do, what people work, what kind of belief system that people have, what kind of occupation that people have, what kind of ideologies that people have. So there will be a major form of similarity or of homogeneity when exists when you talk about this undifferentiated and simple societies to a more complex and differentiated society. So he brings in a number of important concepts which we will discuss one by one in this particular class. He talks about social solidarity, about collective conscience, and I have used this term collective conscience here, but I have also used the term collective consciousness in the previous class when we discussed about rules of sociological method, and these two terms are used interchangeably. The collective conscience, social morphology, mechanical and organic solidarity, social change, social functions, and social pathology. So these are the major themes that he discusses in this particular work. So now coming to this idea of social solidarity. What does social solidarity mean? Now, what do we mean by this term solidarity? A sense of feeling together, isn't it? A sense of identification. When you study in a particular class, you feel a sense of solidarity with that particular class, especially when there is inter-class competition, whether it is sports or games or cultural activities. There is enormous amount of competition between different class, and every student of that class usually feels a sense of we feeling, a sense of belongingness, a sense of loyalty to that particular class. And Durkheim uses this term solidarity almost in the similar sense. So he's asking this very, very profound question. How are individuals made to feel a part of larger social collective? When you're talking about large societies, okay, this question is pertinent for both the simple societies, very, very small societies, like that of a primitive tribal societies, even and compare that with that of a much larger society where you have millions of people becoming members of the society. You can ask this fundamental question: how are individuals made to feel a part of this larger social collective? What are the mechanisms through which each and every individual feels that they are part of this larger society? Because he asked this question because how are their desires and wants, constraints in ways that allow them to participate in the collective? Because we know that every individual, their needs are limitless, their desires are limitless, they are quite different in terms of their orientation, their ideas, their wants, but somehow there is some mechanism through which we have been trained to have a check on our desires and our needs, and we are kind of trained to live in a more or less amicable kind of a situation. So I have mentioned in the previous class that Durkheim was heavily preoccupied with the whole question of social equilibrium or social order or social stability. Okay? So how is that a society is able to function without so much of conflict or so much of violence? And Durkheim's focus was always on the question of this equilibrium or social order or social stability. Okay? He understood social conflict as something abnormal, as something unwelcome, something that needs to be resolved at the earliest thing. So this was one of his fundamental questions. Okay? What makes them, how that human beings are able to participate in the collective? How are the activities of individuals and other social units coordinated and adjusted to one another? Okay? So especially in complicated societies, in modern societies, you have so many different types of activities are being carried out. And how are they coordinated? How are they adjusted to one another? And in order to explain that, he brings in this term, this collective conscience, to elaborate that. Okay? Collective conscience or collective consciousness. He was concerned, so before elaborating this, he was concerned with the system of symbols, particularly the norms, values, and beliefs that human beings create and use to organize their activity. So we discussed in the previous class that Durkheim was very particular that he wants to understand society as an empirical reality, as a thing. It is sui generis. So he argued that sociology as a distinct social science has this distinct or exclusive subject matter, the social as its realm of inquiry. So he believed that the system of symbols, which becomes a part of our culture, it constitutes a very important realm of inquiry, and he believed very strongly that and a scientific study is required to understand the role of these symbols, the system of symbols, particularly norms, values, and beliefs, and to understand the way in which these belief systems influence individuals both personally as well as collectively. Okay? And this is something very important, both collectively as well as personally. So he comes to this whole question of moral facts. Moral facts are phenomena like others. They consist of rules of action recognizable by certain distinctive characteristics. It must then be possible to observe them, describe them, classify them, and look for laws explaining them. Okay? It's a very, very powerful argument. So just like you have material things, okay? Just like you have very concrete data available outside, or just like for a physical scientist or a natural scientist, there is data available for him to explore. He argued that for a sociologist as well, these symbolic systems, which they consist of rules of action recognizable by certain distinct characteristics, and they are moral facts, this cultural domain about norms, values, and other things. They are phenomena like others, and if they are phenomena like others, and if they are something extremely important, if they are consequential, okay, if they have so much of ability to influence the individual as well as the collective life of individuals, then you must be able to observe them, describe them, classify them, and look for laws explaining. And I hope you understand that by these four categories: observe, describe, classify, and look for laws, he is talking about the scientific methodology. Okay, he's talking about the scientific methodology. So he's arguing that you are able to study the value systems in a scientific manner. So he then goes on to define collective conscience as the totality of beliefs and sentiments common to average citizens of the same society, forms a determinate system which has its own life. One may call it as the collective or common conscience. Okay? The totality of beliefs and sentiments common to average citizens of a same society forms a determinate system which has its own life. So here I bring your attention back to our discussion on social fact yesterday. So we discussed that it is general. Social fact is general. It has coercive, ability, and it is external to an individual. Okay? So similarly, when he talks about collective conscience, he's saying that the sum total of beliefs, okay, the sum total of beliefs and sentiments which are held together by the members of that particular society, and this particular conscience, it has a determinate character. It determinate system which has its own life. So it needs to be studied on its own right. And one may call it a collective or common conscience. So it is a sum total of all the beliefs systems held together by all the people, but it is definitely more than an individual conscience. Okay? So that is a kind of very, very interesting argument that Durkheim brings in. Why it is constituted, why it is created by each and every individual. Once it gets formed, it is much more than that. It's an extremely important example of a social fact. So it has an independent reality of its own. People born into a culture internalize it more or less uniformly. So whether if you remember our discussion about social fact, whether it's about religion or about how to get married or how to conduct the death ceremony of a dead person, or how to celebrate, how to express anger, how to express joy, or a host of other systems of practices and beliefs are already there in a society, and a person is born into that, and a person gradually understands this process through the process of socialization. So that aspect of culture, the system of values, beliefs, and norms constrain the thoughts and actions of individuals. We have discussed it sufficiently in the previous class. So there are four important variables of collective conscience according to Durkheim, and they are extremely important. One is, he calls it as the volume, the degree to which the values, beliefs, and rules of the collective conscience are shared by members of a society. Okay. So, what is the overall amount of these, common values or beliefs and rules which are shared by people? Can we very categorically say that everybody of the particular society believes in that, or the volume of this collective conscience is too high that it does not leave out anybody? There is virtually no person who is not a part of collective conscience. Or can we say that this volume is not very high, it is very thin, it's very less. There are a lot of other people in the society who do not believe in that. So this is one of the questions. And the second one is its intensity. Okay, the extent to which collective conscience has the ability to guide and influence the actions of people. You know that the mere existence of collective conscience is not sufficient. We need to understand to what extent they are powerful. Okay? Are they really powerful enough to shape the thinking and actions of individuals? Okay? Are they really powerful so that everybody abides by that? Everybody abides by this collective conscience. And third one is determinateness. Okay? It denotes a degree of clarity in the components of the collective conscience. Okay? Whether is there any confusion about what does a particular norm mean, or what about a particular value mean, or is there any lack of, is there any ambiguity about it, or this particular values and then ideals, are they completely completely are they highly clear, or is there ambiguity about it? And the fourth one, the religious versus secular content, extremely important one. What is the ratio of religious to purely secular symbolism in the collective conscience? What is the influence of religion in these value systems, in these norms, in these cultural practices? Are these cultural values are heavily influenced by religious component? Are they theologically loaded, or are they secular? For example, a host of questions. For example, the question of getting married. Is the marriage seen as a mere contract between two adults, willing adults? Or is marriage seen as a sacrament? Or what is about abortion? How is abortion seen in a society? Is it seen as a sin? Or is abortion seen as an unwelcome one? Is it seen as a sin? Or is it seen as a purely medical procedure, bereft of any religious ideas? So a host of similar kind of questions. So to what extent they have this religious or secular content in these value systems, in these cultural domains, is something very important. So one is the volume, the degree to which they exist. Second one is intensity, how powerful they are. Okay, can people get away without observing this collective conscience, or is it such a scenario that people can't think of disobeying them? They can't even think of disobeying. Or what is the kind of a determinateness? And fourth one is the religious or secular content. And then the game moves on to the maybe the best example in order to understand these things would be to take two crude examples of one, a primitive society, a tribal society, and then second one, that of an industrial advanced urban society. And then you will see that each of these four variables are very different in each of these societies. So Durkheim introduces this idea of social morphology. So Durkheim saw social structure, and he calls it as morphology, as involving an assessment of the nature, the number, arrangements, and interrelations among parts, whether these parts are individuals or corporate units such as groups and organizations. So Durkheim belongs to this theoretical group called as structural functionalism, and they have a particular preoccupation with this whole idea of structure. So he understands social structure as an assessment involving an assessment of the nature, number, arrangement, and interrelations among parts, and whether these parts are individuals or corporate units such as groups and organizations. He attempted to demonstrate the connection between social morphology and collective conscience in different societies. So here he is making a connection between the social conscience on one side and the kind of social structure on the other. So he's trying to bring a theory, he's trying to argue out with a theory that there's a connection between this collective conscience and the social structure or social morphology or social structure and social morphology. And he argues that the collective conscience of primitive societies and collective conscience of advanced societies are quite different because there is a particular relation between the social structure and the collective conscience. So, in order to bring in the connection between collective conscience and social morphology or social structure, he he introduces two terms, that is mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. And the basic aim of Durkheim is to explain the kind of social change by bringing in the connection between collective conscience and the social morphology. So he's talking about two types of solidarity, this sense of we feeling or this sense of feeling attached to a collective set of ideals, and he talks about mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. So typology of society is based on their modes of integration or solidarity. So it's a typology based on their modes of integration. What kind of integration that they have? What are the kind of mechanisms of this integration for an individual with that of a society? So this distinction is both a descriptive typology of traditional and modern societies and a theoretical statement about the changing forms of social integration that emerge with increasing differentiation of social structure. So it is both. It is a descriptive typology because he describes what are the features of societies characterized by mechanical solidarity, and he also describes what are the features of societies characterized by organic solidarity. And also, it is a theoretical statement about the changing forms of social integration. Okay, so as I told you that his fundamental objective is to explain social change. So it is a typology on the one hand, and it is also a theoretical explanation about social change that takes place when society moves from a mechanical solidarity to that of an organic solidarity. So he defines mechanical solidarity thus. Societies characterized mechanical solidarity are described as segmentary, unorganized, or amorphous. Exhibits only rudimentary differentiation, meaning very little specialization of roles and functions. People occupy similar social positions, participate in similar social activities, perform similar economic tasks, and live similar lives. So essentially, he's talking about societies characterized mechanical solidarities as simple societies, and the best example could be that of a tribal society, a primitive society, or a very basic agrarian society. Agrarian society may not be a good example, but a primitive tribal society would be a more acceptable example because it is seen as segmentary, it is seen as unorganized, it is seen as amorphous, and exhibits only rudimentary differentiation. There's not so much of differentiation in terms of what people do, very little specialization of roles and function. And we know that in tribal societies, almost everybody does the similar kind of works. And there could be very vague kind of division of labor based on maybe on age or gender, but otherwise everybody does almost a similar kind of work. People occupy similar positions, social stratification would be very less. Participate in similar social activities. For example, the worship pattern of a religiosity, expression of religiosity of a tribal society would be same. Everybody does it in the same way. You will not have different arguments about it. You will not have different worshiping patterns. You don't have different theology, and perform similar economic tasks and live similar lives. Almost everybody lives a similar kind of life. And this social type is formed through replication, yielding a collection of largely identical and interchangeable individuals, each capable of subsisting independent of the other. And many of these tribal societies have been characterized as unchanging because they continue the similar kind of lifestyle for the past several centuries. Okay? So they reproduce through replication without bringing in so much of changes, especially if these tribal societies are kind of cut off from the other civilizations or if they are isolated. And they yield a collection of largely identical and interchangeable individuals, each capable of subsisting independent of the other. Everybody knows hunting, everybody knows cooking, everybody can lead or everybody does lead a kind of a similar life. In its most elementary form, a secondary society consists of an absolutely homogeneous mass of indistinguishable parts. And this is how he characterizes a simple society characterized by mechanical solidarity. An absolutely homogeneous mass, similar kind of people, often indistinguishable parts. The social structure of such a society would be extremely less because you don't have so much of division of labor, you don't have too many parts of the particular society. Social system would be very simple, and in that sense, it's a very homogeneous society. And when you look at the four features of collective conscience, prevalence of a strong sense of collective conscience. And in such societies, collective conscience, the sum total of all these beliefs and value systems that are shared by people would be very, very strong. And all four variables of collective conscience are very strong here. The cultural system is very high in volume. Okay, that the group members of that particular society, if you're taking the example of a tribal society, they will adhere by the given collective conscience. The rules and regulations that will govern their thinking, their actions, their everyday life, their outlook, their tastes, their opinion. Everything will be completely even determined, influenced by that collective conscience. Its intensity. Okay, everybody obeys that. Nobody can even think of going, against that. Of course, people might try, but then they will have to pay a huge price for that. Okay, so this intensity is very high. Determinateness. To what extent it has clarity in terms of the rules. Okay, can you move away from that, or can you amend that? Can you dilute that? These possibilities are very less, and it would be very high in terms of religious content. The way in which it is explained, they invoke all kind of theological or magical or supernatural ideas, and these ideas will legitimize this particular social systems. Then, what happens when people move away from or people violate these collective conscience? Deviation from the dictats of this collective conscience is viewed as a crime against all members of the society and gods. So any violation will be seen as a crime against all members of the society and also of the god, because it is very high in terms of the religious content. If they if they do something that is not acceptable to that particular group, it will not be tolerated. And so in that sense, the idea of individual freedom, choice and autonomy are low in mechanical societies. Okay? So in such societies, the idea of individual freedom, the argument that I'm an independent individual, I can do whatever I want, this argument simply does not exist. And ideas about choice, about agency, autonomy, these things are low in mechanical societies. That is creating an ideal type, a kind of an ideal typical description, but it's important. And in contrast, organically structured societies in the sense societies which have grown much larger, which has more differentiated parts, which are more complicated, and the ideal typical example would be that of an industrial urban society. They are typified by a large populations distributed in specialized roles in many diverse structural units. Okay? In a advanced society, you will find the division of labor is much higher. There are people working in different designated roles, different extremely specialized areas are there, And organic societies reveal high degree of interdependence among individuals and corporate units, with exchange, legal contracts, and norms regulating these interrelations. And you know that in modern societies, not everybody is involved in production of food. Very few people engage in the production of food or in agriculture. Another section of people, they specialize as educators. Another set of people, they specialize as lawyers, or that of medical practitioners, or accountants, or computer analysts. So each of these sections, because they specialize to a very high degree, are also dependent upon others. And this is in a stark contrast with that of a primitive society where the division of labor is very low, and because the division of labor is so low that people are more independent. Because the realm of your possible activities are very less, so that you can do whatever you want, or you can do almost every important, very basic necessary functions for your survival. Whereas in a advanced societies, you are highly specialized, and the more you specialize, the more dependent you are on others. And this dependency creates a system of interdependence among others, which is ruled by exchange, legal contracts, and norms regulating these interrelations. And in modern industrial societies, where individuals are dispersed throughout a highly diversified occupational systems, people differences stand out more than their resemblance. So in such societies, such industrial advanced societies, people are very different, and these differences of the people in terms of their thinking, in terms of their ideas, in terms of their orientations, in terms of their ideological leanings, their personal preferences, they would be enormously diverse. Okay? You will see a plethora of opinion. For example, the whole question whether God exists, or whether do you believe in God. This question simply does not exist in many of the tribal societies. They may not even ask this question. Whereas in a modern society, you have so much of, there's a spectrum of positions that you can adopt, from that of a committed believer, to that of a completely committed atheist, to people who have different shades of spirituality, agnostics, a host of other ideas, or even this whole idea of sexuality. This idea of sexuality is completely different in modern societies compared to that of a primitive society. Or how to lead a family life. Whether you can live together. This whole idea of living together is something unheard of, or in a primitive society. So each and every aspect of human activity becomes more complicated in a modern society. An average individual is exposed to so many different ways of doing the same thing, and he or she is bombarded with options. That exposure, that level of exposure is something mind-blowing, which does not exist in a traditional society. Now, collective conscience becomes low in its volume, intensity, determinateness, and more in secular content than that of religion. So, this is something very important, because here the claim also is indirectly hinting at what Weber talks about later, when he talks about secularization as a process where society gradually moves out of its religious influence. So most of these activities that human beings do in a modern society are mostly bereft of its religious content. They don't attribute anything to the supernatural. They don't attribute anything to kind of theological propositions. Rather, they argue it on the basis of secular ideas, more rational, modern secular ideas. Again, I must caution you that these are ideal typical representations, and empirical analysis might be different. So this conscience, the collective conscience becomes enfeebled and more abstract, providing highly general and secular value premises for the exchanges, contracts, and norms regulating the interdependencies among specialized social units. So because there is so much of diversity in these modern societies, this collective consciousness becomes more feeble. It becomes less powerful. It becomes enfeebled and more abstract. It loses its contract. It loses its concrete character. It becomes vague. It becomes less powerful and providing highly general and secular value premises for the exchange contracts and norms regulating the interdependencies among the specialized social units. In such societies, individual freedom is great. And Durkheim is a champion of individualism. He says that individual is the new God. He declared the demise of God. He argues that individual is the new God. In modern societies, individualism is a sacred thing. It's just a very fascinating argument. We will discuss when we come to this Durkheim's argument about religion. And the secular and highly abstract collective conscience become dominated by values stressing respect for personal dignity of the individual. So the person becomes the idea of human rights, individual rights, right to life, right to dignity. Okay, these becomes important catchwords. These becomes important slogans in a modern society. And considerably divergent views influenced by different ideologies and moral positions almost on everything. That's what I just explained. Everything. How to rear your children, how to give them education, whether you need to send them to the school or you can give them education through homeschooling, or so each and everything that we otherwise would have taken for granted, that we would have done mechanically, now becomes a problematic proposition. Or who does what in your house as a male or as a female, what are the things that you are supposed to do? And the gender division of labor was never a major concern in traditional societies. There were more or less clear-cut gender roles assigned. Women would cook, men would go out or do agricultural labor. But here, in a modern society, these expectations or these normative propositions have become more and more complicated. So a fundamental relationship in the social world among the structural differentiation, value generalization, and normative specification takes place. A fundamental relationship in the social world among the structural differentiation. So there is this structural differentiation becomes more and more acute, then values become more and more general, and the normative specification becomes more and more weak. As societies differentiate structurally, in the sense as societies develop, society increases in terms of its specialization, values become more abstract. The collective conscience changes its nature as societies become more voluminous. When society becomes too big, too broad, the intensity of their shared set of values becomes much, much lower. That intensity decreases. Because these societies are spread over vast surface, the common conscience or culture rise above local diversities and consequently becomes more abstract. And this is very different when you compare a large society spread across huge geographic area with that of a more localized community, traditional community, where this commitment to these feelings, commitment to their identity, commitment to their firm beliefs will be much more strong. So this, he argues, has enormous implication on a host of other institutions, including that of religion, including law, including education, and a host of other things, which we will discuss in the coming class. So in today's class, we had we began discussing his major work, The Division of Labor, where he brings in he tries to answer this whole question. How does a society is possible? How is a society possible? How does a society work? What is the connection between an individual and a society? And he also wants to bring in a theorization about the society, the transformation of society or social change from a traditional society to that of a modern society. And that he explains by bringing in two important aspects. One is that of collective conscience and the other one is that of social structure. And he argues that when the social structure becomes more and more differentiates, then there's a corresponding change that happens in the social consciousness. And that he explains on the basis of this transition from societies characterized by mechanical solidarity to that of societies characterized by societies characterized by organic solidarity. Okay, so we are this class we are winding up now. and the next class also will be a continuation of the same discussion of the division of labor because it's an extensive work. Thank you.